Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Light Terrified of Boycott now promises to stay in their lane. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. I've done more than 100 videos on the Bud Light story, and I will tell you this is the worst I've seen it for Bud Light so far. It's as if the executives have realized, hey, our business is not coming back, so we'd better just kind of roll all this back, try to keep putting billions of dollars into the brand, and maybe one day it'll bounce back. But it's not bouncing back. It's impossible to bounce back because they've already lost shelf space. Anson Fredericks, former president for distribution for Anheuser-Busch, explains it in this article really simply. Quote, during a busy shopping period on a Friday or Saturday night, if you don't have the beer available cold on the shelf, consumers pick something else, calling shelf space the single largest determinant of sales in a store. Quote, there will be a dramatic shift, Fredericks added, and there has been a dramatic shift, dramatic enough that now Anheuser-Busch, the owner of Bud Light, is promising to stay in their lane. From Yahoo News, Bud Light promises to stay in our lane after trans backlash. And from Newsweek, Bud Light boycott drags down beer makers' U.S. revenue. All of their revenue in the United States down over 9%, even with billions spent on promotions, buying stock back, buying back their debt, hiring the UFC, even getting Kid Rock on their side, Dana White. Whatever they do, they can't seem to save the company. And the people that are maddest about this are the pink news people. Cowardly Bud Light to stay in our lane after Dylan Mulvaney anti-trans backlash. When the pink news people are mad, who are responsible for pushing this agenda into consumer products in the first place, then you know you're going in the right direction. The European boss of Budweiser has said the brewer has learned to stay in their lane following a backlash over Bud Light's work with a transgender influencer, Dylan Mulvaney. Jason Warner, president of brewery giant Anheuser-Busch InBev in Northern Europe, said the company would keep contested political and societal issues separate from its beers after consumers boycotted Bud Light for working with Dylan Mulvaney. Mr. Warner said, quote, the major learning was, hey, I want to enjoy Bud Light when I'm not having to think about all this, and I want to enjoy it with my friends. I want sports. I want music. I want fun. I want friends. I want everyone to be happy together. Unfortunately, the output of that was the complete opposite, which is not what we're there to do. Anheuser-Busch InBev is the world's biggest brewer and makes beers including Stella Artois, Budweiser, Bud Light, Corona, and Becks. The company suffered a slump in Bud Light sales and in its share price last year after its ridiculous decision to send personalized cans of the low-alcohol beer to influencer Dylan Mulvaney, celebrating Mulvaney's promotion of transitioning his gender from a male to a girl or whatever it was he exactly was doing. I've done more than 100 videos on this. I still can't figure it out. The marketing stunt enraged sections of the American right and normal people who were absolutely repelled by this ridiculous promotion, trying to put politics and promoting agendas into consumer products. That prompted calls for a boycott. The uproar led to Bud Light losing its position as the best-selling beer brand in the United States. Mr. Warner called it a very difficult moment and said the brewer learned to stay in our lane as a result. He added, there are very few categories in the world where people care that much. I don't think people would look at mayonnaise that way or care that much about mayonnaise, but they care about their beer. Well, you could ask Unilever that. Unilever has backed off of its insane promotion of politics and social agendas tied in with all its consumer products. This is from the Telegraph. Unilever, who owns Hellmann's mayonnaise, Unilever to tone down social purpose after virtue signaling backlash. Dove and Hellmann's maker says it will no longer seek to force-fit brands with a cause. And there's been a massive pushback on ESG as well. Anheuser-Busch's decision to retreat from activism comes amid a broader reassessment of the focus on so-called ethical, social, and governance concerns in boardrooms. Consumer goods giant Unilever recently watered down and abandoned a pledge on diversity after investors told it to focus more on profits and less on social and environmental issues. What some people don't know, and this is from Bazinga, Billionaire Nelson Peltz backs Unilever's revitalization plan amid investor concerns. Nelson Peltz is the same guy who tried to fix Disney recently. He was pushed back. He wasn't successful, but he's doing it at Unilever. Investors of Unilever had accused the company of virtue signaling by seeking to define a social purpose for all of its brands, including the likes of Hellmann's mayonnaise and Vaseline. What would you think that the social purpose of mayonnaise would be? What about the social purpose of Vaseline? Don't answer that in the comments. I don't want to see it. But of course, this kind of social messaging has nothing to do with consumer products. Consumer products messaging is about telling you we've got a solution for you. Whether it's good feelings, whether it's happiness like Coca-Cola is famous for that, or whatever it is. A brand is a promise, and when you break that promise, you lose the customer. It was done successfully with Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's is actually owned by Unilever. So that social activism theme, no doubt from Ben & Jerry's, infected the rest of Unilever. However, the reason it works for Ben & Jerry's is because it's unique and it was part of Ben & Jerry's original mission. It was part of what they originally did. As a national brand, everyone has always expected and kind of understood Ben & Jerry's to be that way. Even so, Ben & Jerry's has gotten too political, gotten into disputes, caused problems. And now Unilever is actually getting out of the Ben & Jerry's business and ice cream business altogether. From CBS News, Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's 24 years ago. Now it's exiting the ice cream business. They don't want to have anything to do with social activism mixed into their brands. And who can blame them? It's massively destructive. And here's how bad it is for Anheuser-Busch. From Newsweek, Bud Light boycott drags down beer makers' U.S. revenue. Beer giant Anheuser-Busch saw its U.S. revenue decline by 9% in the first quarter of 2024 as the boycott of Bud Light continued to hit sales. There is one bright spot for Anheuser-Busch. That is, a year from now, their sales will still probably be down in the U.S., but the bad losses of sales will be baked into their numbers. That doesn't mean the company is succeeding. It doesn't mean it's doing better. It means they're already going to have lost such a substantial part of their business, there isn't quite as much to lose anymore. The world's largest brewery, which also makes brands like Corona and Stella Artois, reported that sales to retailers have fallen nearly 14%, primarily due to the volume decline of Bud Light. Last year, the company faced a backlash to a Bud Light promotional campaign that included a partnership with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. The campaign, which aimed to celebrate diversity and inclusion, unexpectedly sparked controversy among some of its Bud Light customers. They knew it was controversial. They knew they were, quote, planting the seeds of inclusion, and it was covered well in this article from The Guardian, Panic and Rash Decision-Making, ex-Bud Light staff on one of the biggest boycotts in U.S. history. The staff member points out specifically that the marketing department at Bud Light was trying to, quote, plant the seeds of inclusion. That's how they got to the Dylan Mulvaney promotion. What they didn't do was spend even a few $1,000s on a marketing survey to see what people would think of, let's say, a Dylan Mulvaney's face on a can of Bud Light. What you're supposed to do is go out and get information from actual customers, the customers who would respond most negatively to it, because you need to know, like, how bad could this possibly get? And ask those customers, take a survey, spend $5,000 on it. You're a multi-billion-dollar company. Anheuser-Busch is actually the biggest beer brewer in the world. They have 28% of the world market for beer, but they couldn't be bothered to do this. That's how full of themselves they were. Not anymore. Bud Light eventually lost its spot as the best-selling beer in the United States, dropping to second place behind Modelo Especial, which is owned by the Anheuser-Busch company, but not in the United States. So it's their competitor who owns Modelo who's benefiting from their loss. Now, Anheuser-Busch is a very big company. They own other brands. They're distributed worldwide. Despite the turmoil in the U.S., the Belgium-based company's global performance remains strong. Anheuser-Busch InBev reported an overall revenue increase of 2.6%, largely attributed to sales of Corona, which grew by 15.5% outside its home market of Mexico. The beer maker also cited its diverse product portfolio of drinks beyond its famous beer brands as a reason for revenue growth. The company reported an underlying profit for the quarter of $1.5 billion compared to $1.3 billion in the same period last year. Quote, the strength of the beer category, our diversified global footprint, And the continued growth momentum of our mega brands delivered another quarter of broad-based top and bottom line growth. Top line growth is revenue, bottom line growth is profit, according to CEO Michael Doukeris. How can a multi-billion-dollar company be so stupid and damage itself in the United States, but still do okay overall throughout the world? Because they didn't pull this nonsense throughout the world, they pulled this nonsense in the United States. Now that they've blown themselves up in the United States, all their competitors in the United States can build a huge foundation in the United States and then look at rolling themselves out internationally and competing more with Anheuser-Busch internationally. This is not just the damage of their US business. This is the damage of what should be a very profitable financial foundation for Anheuser-Busch that would keep their competitors at bay. They will never have that security again. They cannot recover the strategic position that they lost in the United States ever again. Not in 5 years, not in 10 years. It won't happen. And from the Telegraph, Citi turns its back on ethical investing as geopolitical upheaval removes its shine. So now they're blaming essentially the war in Ukraine for why ESG and all their woke brands are failing. Investors trade in trendy ESG metrics for old-fashioned profits. Finding social purpose for Knorr stock cubes to make soup or Wall's ice cream was always going to be a tall order. Now Unilever, the self-appointed torchbearer for ethics in the city is how the UK refer to Wall Street, has thrown in the towel. Quote, for some brands, it simply won't be relevant, or it will be an unwelcome distraction. Heinz Schumacher, the company's chief executive, now says, quote, not every brand should have a social or environmental purpose. The about-face follows mockery and investor discontent over the consumer goods giant's vow to find a social mission for every one of its brands, even Hellmann's Mayonnaise. The former CEO, who now had to be thrown out of the company so someone else could come in and fix it, had said Hellmann's Mayonnaise's purpose was to reduce food waste. The claim was dubbed ludicrous, and top investor Terry Smith accused the company of virtue signaling. Unilever's policy change is symbolic of a wider shift in the city. Investors are focusing less on trendy ESG, environmental, social, and governance metrics, and more on old-fashioned profits. Those who fail to respond to the shift will be punished. Unilever, which also owns Dove soap and is now selling off Ben & Jerry's, is not the first to scale back its ESG commitments. British oil giants Shell and BP have refocused their oil and gas efforts after investor frustration with the cost and lack of profits from renewable energy pushes. And in banking, NatWest is still reeling from an ill-fated battle with Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage after employees at NatWest closed out all of his bank accounts and wouldn't bank with him because of a clash in values. The scandal ignited a firestorm that led to the resignation of Alison Rose, NatWest boss, and an industry-wide review into so-called debanking, with critics holding up the saga as more proof that companies should virtue signal at their own risk. Quote, there's definitely been a rowing back on ESG, says Ashley Kelty, an expert in oil and gas research. Quote, I think it's a case of people wanting companies to stick to what they're supposed to be doing, not agitating for various causes that have nothing to do with their core business. Shareholders are saying, we don't care which causes you support. We want you to make money. You would think this basic concept, we want you to make money, is something companies would understand. Anheuser-Busch seems to understand it better now. I don't trust them. I don't think you should support any company that ever fooled around with any of this, and that would include a lot of companies. Something is deeply wrong with management when they take their focus away from trying to make money for their shareholders and start to focus on pushing social agendas. Companies are not built to do things like that. They're only built to be profitable for their investors, not to make social change. Sometimes it does happen accidentally. Sometimes it happens deliberately. But there should be a profit motive. Always there should be a profit motive. If there isn't a legitimate profit motive involved in social change, there should be no social change. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.